Hello, welcome to Humanity Matters at the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center, a very special place where you have a very sobering black, white, and gray experience, and you really think about what it means to be alive and why you're here. Humanity Matters is about art, religion, and Western thought, and I am beyond honored to sit with Rabbi Josh Franklin from the Jewish Center of the Hamptons in East Hampton. He is modern, he is musical, he is an author and a deep, thoughtful leader. He's known to build bridges. He recently, this summer, had a program in the Hamptons that I wish everyone could have experienced. We met in a church, a Presbyterian church, I think maybe
Episcopal Church.
Episcopal Church, of course,
and
sanctuary.
At the Jewish Center.
And he's just very, very creative. And I introduced Rabbi Josh. He's just simply marvelous and cool and modern.
Thank you so much. You make me feel, I'm turning red a little bit for all this flattery you're throwing my way. And thank you for having me back. It's really an honor to be back on the podcast.
Thank you. You were my first podcast, and I did not know that we would evolve into an educational program. We would be involved with Stony Brook, art, religion, and Western thought through the Judeo-Christian history of art, which is visual. And how perfect that I would get a rabbi that worked with the Old and the New Testament. So what do we learn morally that's the same or different?
So let me start out by saying that the New Testament is not my book. However, in terms of building bridges and in terms of engaging with the world around us and our neighbors who are around us, we certainly have to learn from all the different ideas that are out there and not insulate ourselves and simply say, this is my book, that's their book, and that's it. So this past summer, and in fact since I've been in the Hamptons, we've done a program with St. Luke's Episcopal Church in East Hampton where we've done co-classes together, where I first taught with Reverend Dennis Brunel and now their new Reverend Ben Shamba, and we explore different ideas through the lenses of our own faiths. In the past, we've done something along the lines of Jewish and Christian parables, where we've showed that our traditions and the stories that we tell actually teach similar morals. But one of the problems that we had is that everyone is like, oh, look, we are so similar. We're exactly the same. We're teaching exactly the same thing. And look how alike Judaism and Christianity are. And of course, building bridges doesn't mean only finding commonalities. It also means exploring the differences that we have with our Christian neighbors. And so the class that we taught this year was called Same Text, Different Meaning, where we have shared scripture, particularly in the Hebrew Bible, or as they would call the Old Testament, which, by the way, are not the same thing. They might have most of the same books, but actually the order matters, and the order of the Hebrew Bible is different than the Old Testament, as one of the things that we taught. But we learned about similar texts that we shared with each other and how we interpret them differently. So, for example, the first class was on the Ten Commandments.
I love that.
And essentially, one of the issues that we have with the Ten Commandments is we all think we have the same Ten Commandments. They're the basis for Western law and the basis for American law, and they're not. In fact, there's a whole public debate that goes on. Should the Ten Commandments be displayed in our schools and in our courts? And before even beginning to give you an answer to that question, I would actually ask another question, which is, which Ten Commandments? Not just the Jewish Ten Commandments or the Christian Ten Commandments, but how about the Jewish, the Protestant, and the Catholic Ten Commandments? The way that we count each of the commandments is completely different. In fact, Jews don't even call them commandments at all. We call them the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances. This is particularly noteworthy because our very first way of counting is Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I Adonai am your God, who led you out of Egypt. And it's quite obvious that is not a direct commandment. It's, for some people, an idea of a preamble, but another, it's about a covenantal statement that we are connecting with God through the very reading of this. But it's an utterance, not a commandment. And then Catholics actually count it differently than Protestants. Catholics count the commandment for coveting twice, not coveting and not coveting your neighbor's house. And then they combine some of the earlier commandments. So when we have them listed any which way in a public space, it actually shows deference to a particular faith. And it's not the basis for Western values. The differences do indeed matter. Our understandings of them matter. How about the fact for honor the Sabbath and keep it holy? So critically important for the Jewish people.
Yes.
And our Shabbat is really probably one of the core pieces of what it means to live a Jewish life. For Christians, Shabbat, the Sabbath, is less so and becomes more of a metaphorical idea. So I bring this up to say that our differences matter, and not just helping us understand our neighbors, but helping us understand ourselves. And if we're going to build bridges, it's not only about understanding commonality. It's about understanding differences and not just tolerating differences, but respecting differences.
Don't we need that now more than ever?
Absolutely.
Do you think we're maybe in a second renaissance of going back to the values? I love Torah class with you. I must have it. But you're so adorable. You said, well, what do you think Jesus was reading? You know, he's saying it in the sanctuary. Nobody would say. He was reading Torah. And then you went into Torah class and you said, what do you think Maimonides, the doctor, was reading? He was reading Plato and Aristotle. Didn't you say that?
Correct. I talk a lot about
amazing.
the idea, especially when we're talking about creativity as a whole. Synthesis is one of the core tools of creativity, being able to take different disciplines and fuse them and merge them together. So Maimonides, for example, wasn't just understanding Judaism. He was actually framing Aristotelian thought within a Jewish context and synthesizing the two of them together in order to form one of his major works, The Guide for the Perplexed. But Jesus, obviously, too, the core of his understanding of spiritual life wasn't the New Testament, which didn't exist yet, or the Gospels, or anything new.
That's right.
His foundation was the rabbinic texts as well as the Hebrew Bible. So, to understand what Jesus is speaking and the lessons that he's teaching, you really have to be able to understand the fundamentals of it.
Beautiful. It's so important to know the fundamentals of everything. We could be so healthy and so cleansed. And maybe you could explain to people, when we're in a Shabbat and then we go into Torah class, we call it a Parsha. But before I ask the question, could you make everybody understand, whether they be Jewish or not, what the importance is and why we study the Parsha and Torah?
I think there's a lot of people out there who think that studying Torah is about acquiring knowledge. That's not what we're doing. In fact, you can know the entire Torah and have tons and tons of knowledge, but not a lot of wisdom. It's not even that you don't understand. It's that the Torah has got to be relevant and meaningful. So I'm not just trying to help people understand what is in the Torah. My major goal as a rabbi, especially when I teach, is to help people see Torah as a reflection of their own lives. Yes. And to help people unpack its meaning and its relevance as a guide for them in the way that they live. And it's not about what you know, it's about how you actually understand what you know and use it as a guide for your life.
Well, I wanted to take that thought, and this Parsha, if I can interpret properly, was about Adam, the flood, the rainbow.
So we just restarted the Torah all anew. We celebrated the holiday of Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah is where we finish the book of Deuteronomy, and then we actually start Genesis, Bereshit, and we go into the story of Adam, followed by the story of Noah. And now in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Lech Lecha, we enter...
It's Lech Lecha this
Lech
week.
Lecha
My
this
favorite
week.
is this week.
So now we begin...
We come back to where I started. Oh my goodness!
Tell me about your love of this week's Torah portion, Parshat Lech Lecha.
Thank you for stabilizing. Yes, it's very important because your talk. I was feverishly writing my notes in here, and we are, I must say, politically right before the. This is not to be political. This is to show you how I live very, very well in this world, understanding what's going on and how I could live. So we are 2 weeks less before the mayoral candidate perhaps will be socialist, communist, a hater of Jewish people. I, being from a family of Holocaust survivors, every Shabbat I was told, hey, we were exterminated, I was really left unhinged. I had to make sure I got to the service on time, but I didn't know what this was going to be. And basically, Rabbi talked about something that changed, well, for many of you that might be listening, the ability to have a syllabus in art, through faith, Western thought, and religion. And the reason it came about, I was very upset about what could happen overnight in my beloved New York City, where my family came as immigrants. And you talked, and we'll end with this session, about globalization and the scattering of light, and how you talked to us. This is not a bad thing, Ranelle. And why don't you say it in your eloquent way as I have the chills as I'm remembering that beautiful, blessed Saturday a few days ago.
Well, I love the fact that you can take one thing that we learn and see it as a reflection of what you are thinking about in a powerful way, even though that might not have been my intention to tell you what to think or what you should be thinking about. But one of the things that we learned as we studied the story of the Tower of Babel, Babel in Hebrew is Bavel, which is synonymous with Babylonia. And the experience of being in Bavel and being in Babylonia wasn't just an experience about being mivubal, confused, or babbling. It was the real first experience of exile of the Jewish people, where they were kicked out of Judea in the year 586 BCE and forcibly exiled to Babylonia. There's really two ways to understand what happened to them. Both use a word that has a similar root, or two words that have the same root. One is galut, which means exile, and the other is golah, which means diaspora. And you can see your expulsion as the ultimate curse. Or you can see the scattering of the Jews around the world as the ultimate blessing.
I couldn't believe it.
And
I couldn't believe what you said.
when we are living in different lands, when we are exposed to different cultures, we actually are able to better synthesize the ideas of the world around us with Jewish thought. And we've come up with the most creative and inspirational ideas, not by being insular, but by interacting with the world around us.
Beautiful.
And so, again, galut and golah both share the same root, gimel lamed he, which in Hebrew means discovery.
Discovery.
Yeah, or to reveal. So, for example, if you go on a birthright trip, you go on a
Aliyah.
Taglit is the name of the program. Taglit means discovery, same root. Or we have in our morning prayers, we say, Galui v'yadua, lifnei chisek vodecha, revealed is everything before your great throne. And it's or you actually have another line, Vaigal, God opens our eyes, or reveals to us, or essentially, the idea of being outside the land of Israel is an experience of discovery, if you let it be. If you let diaspora be your greatest blessing, it will be. But there's also sometimes a longing, a desire to go back so much that, especially for a lot of the Jews who were originally exiled in 586 BCE, that they wanted to go back, that they weren't able to adapt to their current surroundings. And for me, again, the diaspora as a rabbi living outside the land of Israel, I don't see this as a curse. I see this as my calling and a great blessing. And my goal is to always help people understand that our role in living where we do live in the United States as Jews is not just to be a light unto the nations, a blessing unto the nations, but to derive blessing from the nations and from the people who we live among.
And that's part of your program that you did in the summer, a different way of looking at it, different lens, but really understanding our differences and being able to have good conversation and communication, which is desperately needed.
Yeah, one of the things I'm proudest about most about my experiences as being the rabbi in East Hampton is the tight-knit faith community that the clergy in East Hampton have. We have what's called the East Hampton Clericus. It's an interfaith group of rabbis, pastors, priests who come together in order to figure out the ways that we can best support the needs within our community, but also to figure out the ways that we could best support the needs of each other. And so after October 7th, one of the most extraordinary things happened. We decided that we were going to do a rally, and because we were in pain, we needed to grieve, we needed to actually come together in order to support those in Israel who were hurting, who had been living a post-October 7th life. And so November 2023, we held this rally in Herrick Park, and every single house of worship sent one of their clergy people in order to support us and in order to take part. And that was quite unique and quite extraordinary. Talking about building bridges, those bridges didn't just come because of happenstance and because they were supportive necessarily of the predicament that Israel was in. They came because we work within the community in order to make those connections, forge those bonds, and we not just respect one another, we really do love and care for one another as a community.
Beautiful.
And when another house of worship is going through a crisis, they should know that we'll be there. In the same vein, Martin Luther King weekend this year, I'll be at Calvary Baptist Church, where they're doing, which is the local African-American church, where we'll be doing a program with them, and I'll be taking part in it because we support each other.
It's wonderful. And what you said with this new Parsha coming up, which is my favorite, Lech Lecha, how can we use this to artists who have perhaps a calling?
Sure.
Can you speak to the calling of creativity in Lech Lecha?
I'll tell you one of the greatest injustices in translation comes from how we translate the opening words of the Torah portion this week, Lech Lecha, which get rendered something along the lines of "go forth." But if you understand the Hebrew, you could have just said "Lech," go. But the Lecha is the key piece, because Lecha means to you. Lech Lecha is really about going to yourself, finding who you are, who you were meant to be, and being able to share that with the world. I'll tell a story. It's a famous Hasidic story which appears in Martin Buber's book, The Way of Man. He tells the story of a guy who was a simpleton, so much so that they called him the Golem, and the Golem forgot everything. He was so disorganized and so disheveled, he decides, I'm going to fix this about myself. And so he decides, before he goes to bed, he's going to write a list of everything that he needs to do in the morning and where every single thing is so that he can get up and actually, for once, be organized. And so he writes down his entire list, and he wakes up in the morning and he says, pants, here they are, check. Shirt, check. Hat, check. Gloves, check. And he's going down the list, and suddenly he panics.
Oh.
And he realizes the most important thing that he forgot. I forgot myself, he says.
The right side of the brain.
This isn't who I am. I'm the person who's disorganized, and that's okay, and I'm comfortable with who it is that I am. And I would say, as a rabbi, as an artist, as a thinker, as an individual, the hardest thing to do is to be comfortable with who it is that we are. And I think that takes time, that takes experience, but it takes a consciousness that it's okay to have something along the lines of impostor syndrome, where we think, oh, how could they be entrusting me to do X, Y, and Z? And early on in my career, I had significant imposter syndrome. Who am I that they're entrusting this congregation to me? Who am I that people should come to me for advice? And eventually you realize, I just need to be comfortable with who it is that I am. I need to Lech Lecha. I need to go to myself.
Go forth.
And I don't need to go somewhere else. The first place I need to go before going anywhere else is to myself. And that's what I think Lech Lecha is really about. For Abraham, it was about discovering who he really was before he can be blessed and before he can bless the world with everything in his identity and who he was.
Since you did the program, what is the shared spiritual growth? Do Jews, Christians look at creativity in the same way? Because when we open the Bible, it says in the beginning. Does that mean creation? And what is creativity? What does God say about creativity for artists, musicians?
It seems quite strange that the very first word of the Bible is not a clear-cut word that we can easily understand. Bereshit doesn't simply mean in the beginning. It might mean something along the lines of when God began to create, Bereshit bara Elohim, or it could mean with beginning God created. But one of the important factors is not necessarily what those words mean, which have sparked endless commentaries.
Debate.
But it's the fact that something strange or something different, something unexpected exists when you first open up the Torah. Yes. And it should spark inquiry. And inquiry is one of the greatest ways that we can go down the rabbit hole of spirituality. Simply to ask, why does the Torah start this way? And by the way, I often talk about the idea that the Torah ends in a rather strange way as well. It ends with what I would call almost a run-on sentence, followed by a non-concluding thought. And I like to say that the Torah really ends not with a period, but with ellipses, ... Not just because we go back to the very beginning, but because I think, not just because we might go back to the beginning or we might go on to the book of Joshua, but because I think at the end of the day, we're meant to insert our own story, our own narrative, our own understanding of not just how the Torah concludes, but what the Torah means.
On that note, I've always wanted to ask a rabbi this question with the ... and the thought of imagery. From what I was told, and you're a modern rabbi, which I love, what is the take on imagery like angels? Because we haven't produced a whole lot of visual artists, but we have produced art collectors, art lovers, and when we do create a great artist like Chagall, ooh la la.
So I'll start.
It defies everything.
I'll start out by saying that I actually don't define myself with any labels. I'm a rabbi, and I'm a Jew. I think being Jewish is more important than whatever adjectives you might use to qualify your Jewishness. So although I actually attended and learned in a Reform Rabbinical Seminary, I'm simply a rabbi and I'm simply a Jew. Having said that, going back to your question, why don't we have more artwork as Jews? Well, going back to the commandments conversation, the second commandment is not just don't make a graven image, but don't make any likeness of that which is above or that which is below or that which is in the water. And Judaism took that a little bit differently than Christianity did. So Judaism took that a little bit more stringently. But I'll tell you one of the great exceptions, because one, we actually do have a lot of exceptions. Even if you look at some of the mosaics on the synagogue floors
Byzantine.
in Israel, you actually see that they were making imagery.
Yes.
But the tradition and the understanding of that particular commandment did indeed evolve. But one of the greatest sources of illuminated manuscripts for Jewish texts comes from the Haggadah, our Passover manual for how to actually tell the story of Passover. Mm-hmm. And in all of these illuminated manuscripts of Europe and even in modern Haggadot today, you actually see there are people who are drawn, and there's almost this exception that's made in order to bring the text, in order to bring the narrative to life. And partly it's because I think creativity is almost a mandate on Passover. It's not just about reading that which is within the text. It's about telling the story. And telling a story requires an immense amount of creativity. It's not called the Kriya, the reading. It's called the Haggadah, the telling.
But you're saying two different things. I don't want to interrupt you, but you're saying it's not allowed, but on the Haggadah, it seems to need it.
The Haggadah is one of the exceptions. However, and here's an interesting exception. One of the ways that they often draw people is that they would draw a person, but they would use the head of a bird.
That's why Chagall with different greens or different... That's interesting.
Chagall, I think, is almost his own thing. I mean, Chagall was even using Christian imagery, even though he's a Jewish artist, or at least we'll claim him as a Jewish artist.
He is a Jewish artist.
In his artistry, yeah.
So he's a Jewish artist. I'm a lover of Chagall, and I really understand that. And actually, no Jewish artist had the chutzpah to be born in a religious family where the father, the fisherman, would get to eat, then the mother, and what was ever left for the children. And yet, with that poverty, they sent him to art school in Vitebsk. And actually, could be a whole nother thing. 1917, they made him the chairman, but they promised the Bolsheviks, just like what kind of you see going on a little bit. But it didn't work out for the artist. It didn't work out. I got derailed. But he did use angels. Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing me back. Okay, he used angels. He also, the reason he did Christ on the cross, I never understood it. I think it was the horror of him going through the Holocaust and then 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution. Imagine twice in your life to see such that. It was unbearable to him. So he felt he was going to portray Jesus truly for the Jew.
Another idea. I got this from the book My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok. Is it Chaim Potok? Who wrote My Name is Asher Lev? It's Chaim Potok. So in My Name is Asher Lev, this young Hasidic boy becomes a great, great artist, and he's trying to portray a symbol of suffering in his artwork. And he says the only real symbol of suffering in that it can be portrayed in art that there's a real precedent for is the cross.
Exactly.
And so he really shocks the whole community and upsets a lot of people as a Jewish artist, portraying a cross and his mother suffering by putting her on a cross. So it's chutzpah, but it's also
it's
perhaps
reality.
I think
it's sacred realism.
There's a little commentary on Chagall too, perhaps doing exactly the same thing as a Jew, really trying to portray suffering. So, for example, in the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac, there is a cross in the background and Sarah hiding behind a tree.
I didn't know that.
And
I have a look again.
Yeah, and I think part of the idea of that is to be able to portray the suffering of Sarah, the mother, the suffering of Isaac, as well as perhaps even the suffering of Abraham going through with this act.
You brought it home, because this is what I feel is that what we need is to understand through the history of art the Judeo-Christian connection of suffering, remembrance. Okay, and as my visionary Dr. Bernie Fershpan says, and what's great about coming into the Holocaust Museum, it sobers you. Okay, but he says, okay, now what? We have to, as leaders, create heroes and good ideas and great stories and music and art and lore. And we have to do more of this. But I want to thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Ranelle.
For tuning in to Humanity Matters through art, faith, religion, through the history of art. It's all been documented, and it's all true, and it's there to heal you and make you into the artist that you were born. And you don't have to be a painter. As we saw, a lawyer, a rabbi, a filmmaker, a comedian, and me, just a humble art professor I'm looking in my guests for their extraordinary. And thank you, Rabbi Josh. Thank you.